My name is Alex. Every year me and my cousin Chad go camping 4 times a year. In 2 days he'll be going on another one. It's the day we go camping. We're on the way there now. I can't drive, so we're riding in Chad's truck. 2 more hours till we get there. We're here. Chad and I are unpacking. Chad, did you hear that? Chad. Red Water. By Murder House. Found in www.creepypasta.org web link. I was on a business trip about a year ago and I had to drive from Denver to LA. It was a long drive and I was growing tired of the road, so I stopped at the Holiday Inn hotel that was nearby. I walked up to the desk and rung the bell. Just seconds later, a man came out from the back room. "Hello sir, my name is John Shelby," the man said. "How can I assist you?" "I'm looking for a room," I replied. "Are there any available?" He searched in his computer to see if a room was available. To my luck, there was one more room left. He gave me a key and told me to have a nice night. I asked him to point me toward a vending machine and he did just that. When I walked to the vending machine, craving a bag of chips, I noticed a pool at the end of the hall. A lot of hotels have pools. There's nothing strange about that. What got me confused was the fact that the water was red, blood red. I purchased my bag of chips and went back to the front desk where the man was still present. "What's up with that pool back there?" I asked him. "What do you mean, sir?" he asked, a confused look grown upon his face. "The water is red," I said. "Why is it red?" He took off his glasses and took a deep breath. "Well, it's kind of a freaky story," he said. "Years ago, a woman was found brutally murdered in that pool and the water was contaminated with her blood." "Are you telling me that her blood is still in there?" No, of course not," he said. "The water was removed and the pool was closed down. But many people say they see the pool filled with red water." He put his glasses back on. "Personally, I had never seen it, but I think this hotel likes to play tricks with your mind." "So this place is haunted then?" He shook his head. "Yes." I was shocked, not really scared, but just surprised because I had never had an experience like that before. I went up to my room, took a well-needed hot shower, and I lay in bed. I couldn't sleep for some reason. My mind was so curious and it had so many questions that needed answered. I got out of bed, put on a shirt and I walked out into the hallway. I walked down the hall and headed toward the pool. It was quiet out in the halls. I guess nobody else had trouble sleeping. I was laughing at myself when I realized I was in my underwear, so it was a good thing that nobody was out in the halls at that time. I did believe that I saw a woman cross from one room to the other. I didn't think anything of it at the time, I just figured it was another guest. When I reached the floor of the pool, I was able to see the blood-red water even from way down the hall. I passed the front desk, nobody was there. I then passed the vending machine and I stopped directly in front of the door that would lead to the pool. I tried the door, but it was locked. I don't think I would have gone in even if it wasn't. I looked through the large window that showed the blood-contaminated pool. It looked as if the pool had been closed for a long time. I looked behind me, down the hall to the elevator. I was imagining a scene from The Shining when the stream of blood came shooting out of the elevator. I had a feeling that I would see something similar to that, but I didn't. Instead, I saw a woman, standing at the edge of the pool and looking as if she was about ready to jump in. She was completely nude, not a single piece of clothing on her body. When she snapped her head my way, I jumped back in fear and I walked back to my room as fast as I could, taking the stairs next to the vending machine instead of the elevator. Hours later, I woke up to my alarm going off. I took a shower, threw on some clothes and I walked down to the first floor for breakfast. After breakfast, I was ready to check out and get back on the road. I decided to take one last look at the pool before I leave. I walked slowly past the front desk, past the vending machine and to the pool. I was still freaked out by what happened the night before as I looked through the window. I was surprised to see that the pool was empty. There was no red water and there was no woman. I walked back to the front desk where a woman was working. "Is John Shelby available?" I asked. She gave me a confused look. "Excuse me?" she said. "John Shelby," I repeated. "He was working here last night." "John Shelby died back in 1982, she said. "He killed himself after murdering a woman, right there in that pool." She laughed. "Is this a joke, sir?" "Yeah," I said, forcing out a laugh. "It was just a joke." I returned my key and I left the building. I got back on the road, never forgetting about what had happened that night in that hotel. Fractured. By Namuya Shilabhain. Found in www.creepypasta.org web link. My name is Sophia Radcliffe, and I am a retired social worker with the Ministry of Children and Family Development. I am only writing this because I am no longer working with the ministry, and have no obligations to keep my personal experiences to myself. However, I will not use real names to protect the identity of the survivors. I have been given permission to share this story by my former client, Mrs. Sanderson, who is the only other person who knows the truth. In the winter of 2003, I was given a case that would be the deciding factor in entering my early retirement. I had been a social worker for 14 years by this point, and I honestly believed I had seen it all, but this case was interesting to say the least. The 6-year-old girl that I was going to be working with had just been placed in the psychiatric ward of a nearby hospital, and I was to meet with her every week until she was considered well enough to be moved to a foster home. The following information is what I am able to share from her case file, news reports and the research that followed. The girl's father was a lieutenant in the military and had been overseas when she was born, unaware of her existence until he came home to find his wife with a 2-year-old girl. Unfortunately, Lieutenant Alan Blake returned with severe post-traumatic stress disorder, and had begun to suffer from paranoia, believing that his wife had cheated on him, and that the girl wasn't even his own daughter. His wife, Catherine, tried everything she could think of to convince him, even going so far as to take the family to get a paternity test, but by then the damage had been done. In his attempts to overlook his crumbling mental health, Alan took to heavy drinking and pushed himself away from his family, occasionally interacting with his wife, though he ignored the girl completely. According to their family doctor, Catherine regularly brought her daughter in for checkups, and he had suspected that she was being abused. However, with the mother saying everything was alright, and having no proof that the bruises were anything other than playtime injuries, the doctors kept quiet and decided to simply keep an eye on them. I remember hearing the news story just a few nights before, on Christmas Eve, about a man who had attacked his wife and daughter with the knife they had used to carve the turkey. A neighbor reported that he had been watching for his brother and sister-in-law to come for dinner, and noticed that the power in the Blake home suddenly went out, and that the only source of light was from the fireplace in the living room. Wanting to be helpful, the neighbor headed over with a couple flashlights and candles, but stopped when he saw a strange-looking man in a suit standing in the living room with Catherine, who was holding the poker to the fireplace while covered in blood. Horrified, he ran back to his home and called the police. When police arrived at the scene, Alan was dead, having been beaten to death with a poker, and Catherine herself was bleeding out, with over 20 cuts on her body, screaming about a thin man that had broken into her home before she died of a sudden heart attack. The girl seemed to be unharmed, though highly disturbed by the events, and was brought to the hospital for further monitoring, just in case. Though as it turned out, the girl had her share of trauma, screaming whenever she saw a reflective surface, screaming about the same thin man that had terrified her mother. 9 years passed, and the girl, named Kenna, had long been released and sent all kinds of homes in an attempt to find a family that could help her with her unusual symptoms. She had been diagnosed with paranoia and schizophrenia, and was still unable to bear looking in the mirror for fear of seeing the figure that had haunted her since her parents' deaths. I remember one day when she told me that if she did look in the mirror long enough, she could hear him whispering to her, though when I asked what he was saying, she refused to say another word. It was on Kenna's 15th birthday that I told her I found a family that was willing to take her in and help her keep healthy. I had been visiting with them for weeks, scheduled and unscheduled, so that I could see them at their best as well as their worst, and was confident I had found a good fit. Mrs. Sanderson had a well-kept home, a 19-year-old daughter named Gwen, and 2 sons, Heath and Paul, aged 17 and 16 respectively. The family was fully prepared for her, adding another bed to Gwen's room and clearing the one side of posters and belongings so that Kenna could have her own space. To my pleasant surprise, they had even gone so far as to install small curtains over all of the mirrors in the house, so they could be easily covered when they were not in use, to minimize the chances of her having a breakdown. After her birthday lunch, I took Kenna to the Sandersons' place, made sure she had all her things, there wasn't much, and reminded her to make sure she took her medication. We sat and talked with her new foster mother and siblings, as it was a Sunday afternoon and most of them were home. They all seemed to hit it off well, and I took my leave once Kenna told me she had unpacked. I told her I would continue visiting for a while until I knew for sure whether it was going to work or not, and that I would be in touch. After 4 months, I closed her file. Everyone makes mistakes, and after reading Kenna's diary that was recovered, I know just how wrong I was. These are just a few of the entries, though almost every day was disturbing to read. February 23, 2012. Dear Diary. I'm starting to think Ms. Radcliffe made a mistake when she left me here. Mrs. Sanderson is okay I guess, but Heath and Paul are horrible, and I'm not even sure Gwen is human. How can someone be such a nightmare? She wouldn't stop complaining that she had to cover her mirror with ugly curtains and she's refusing to leave it covered. It points right at my bed and I saw him again, hovering over me, watching me with his empty face. I screamed, I couldn't help it. All she did was call her brothers in so they could all laugh at me. I hate them. I'm just glad they haven't found you. Love, Kenna. March 17, 2012. Dear Diary. While Mrs. Sanderson was out today, Heath and Paul jumped out at me, dressed like what they think the thin man looks like. I shouldn't have told them anything. Gwen thought it was hilarious, of course, and took it one step further. She made them hold me down while she sat on me, she's really heavy, and made me look in her handheld mirror for 10 whole minutes before they got bored and wandered off. He's getting closer. I wonder what's going to happen if he catches me? I don't know, but at this rate it would probably be better than staying here. Love, Kenna. April 30, 2012. Dear Diary. I had that dream again, about the night my parents died, and when I first saw the thin man. I was looking at the ornaments on the tree, the pretty red ones that were my favorite, and I saw Daddy standing there with the knife looking at Mom, the thin man standing behind him, saying something in his ear. I can see Mom grab the poker and force it through Daddy's head, and keep beating him until there was only chunks left. She told me it would be okay, that I wouldn't hurt anymore. I think that's when she saw the thin man, watching her, with those long, black wisps coming off his back and picking up the knife. I saw him cut her up, but I couldn't turn around. I could only see it through the reflection in the ornament. That's when the police show up and take me to their car, where I stay sitting by myself until the big black bags Mom and Daddy are in come out on the stretchers. In the dream I'm looking through the rearview mirror, and the thin man is looking back. Why won't that dream stop? I don't want to think about it anymore. I'm going to go downstairs and get some water. Good night. Love, Kenna. May 3, 2012. Dear Diary. It's been 3 days since Mrs. Sanderson said I'm doing well enough that she thinks it's time to take the curtains down. There must be a mirror in every room now, and whenever I walk by I can see him. I've been trying to cover them back up, but whenever I get close enough I see him waiting for me. I'm scared that if I don't cover them again he'll find me. I'm going to go try again. Wish me luck. Love, Kenna. May 4, 2012. Dear Diary. I hate them. I hate them all. If Mrs. Sanderson didn't get rid of those stupid curtains this wouldn't have happened. Yesterday Gwen said she was sorry, and that she was only mad that she had to share her room. She told Heath and Paul to help her get rid of the mirrors. They went to all the rooms and pulled them all down so I didn't have to, and put them in the basement. My medication makes me a really heavy sleeper, and I guess she noticed because I woke up to find the mirrors covered with all the mirrors in the house. They even put one on the back of the door so I wouldn't come out. They were everywhere. Everywhere. He doesn't have eyes, but I know he was looking at me. He was looking and coming closer, and he was right in front of me. I could hear him just like I did before, but he's wrong. I couldn't do anything like that, I'm not like my parents. When Mrs. Sanderson came home, she heard me screaming and I got in trouble. She yelled at me. She hit me. She told me I was being childish and needed to grow up and stop pretending there was a monster in the mirror. I hate them but I can't do it. I can't. I can't. I can't. I can't. I'm not like that. I can't. I'm not like my parents. I'm not. I can't. Why won't it stop? I think I need an app or something. Kenna. June 19, 2012. Don't look, he's coming. 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 July 31, 2012. I'm in the hospital. So tired. I don't remember what happened, but I think I heard Gwen. Everyone's mad at me. I need to tell the nurse to cover the mirror. Why hasn't anyone covered the mirror? Why is he standing there? He isn't coming for me, but he's laughing. I think he's pleased that I hurt her, or amused. The doctor prescribed a higher dose. August 4, 2012. She's moving out. Gwen is going to college now, and she's finally moving out at the end of the month so she can stay with her best friend while they're going to school. I wish I could enjoy it more, but the meds have been really harsh lately. I'm always tired, and I keep on blacking out. I think I've been sleepwalking too because sometimes I wake up with grass and stuff on my feet. Maybe with Gwen gone things will get better, but I doubt it. I just hope she doesn't pull another stunt to make up for leaving. I need sleep. September 13, 2012. He is here. I can't see him, but he can see me. He's never leaving, and I know he's here for me. He won't leave. He can't leave. He won't leave. Please don't leave me. He isn't leaving. It's just him and me. Just me and him. He's always been there. The only one that's ever been there. Kenna had a fondness for writing in purple ink, her writing neat, and tiny with little circles to dot the i's. It was a normal girl's diary, except that no one saw her as a normal girl. Her classmates saw her as the crazy girl who saw weird things and screamed at her own reflection. The girl with no real family or friends, except maybe me, but I left her. While the whole diary itself was difficult for me to read, it was the last entry that I found most unnerving. Spread across 2 pages and, so far as the police have told me, written in the blood of her foster family. October 26, 2012. Happy birthday to me. Happy birthday to me. Happy birthday, dear Kenna. It's just what I've always wanted. Mrs. Sanderson was the only survivor, having been found in critical condition on the kitchen floor. She was interviewed as soon as she was stable and had the ability to talk about what happened. The following is the conversation between Mrs. Sanderson and Constable Wilder about the events of October 26. Mrs. Sanderson, I was making a special dinner because my Gwen was coming home for the weekend, and I wanted her to feel like she never left. Heath and Paul were upstairs playing their video games and Kenna was in the living room doing some cleaning to get ready. I kept on hearing her talking to herself. Well, I should say, I heard her talking to her mirror. Constable Wilder, I'm sorry, I thought you said she was afraid of mirrors? Mrs. Sanderson, she was, for most of the time she was with us, but she had a turnaround after a recent hospital stay. She seemed to find comfort in the mirrors after that, and carried a compact mirror around with her wherever she went. Her teachers were concerned because she had started talking to it at school. Constable Wilder, and what kinds of things did she talk about? Mrs. Sanderson, it varied, actually. She would sometimes tell it to be quiet, get into an argument, or sometimes she would whisper to it about not wanting to hurt, or not wanting to hurt someone. Constable Wilder, and you didn't think to inform her doctor? Mrs. Sanderson, the doctor said that her confronting the mirror was an improvement and didn't seem overly disturbed by anything. He just told us that increasing the medication a little would keep her calm and she would get over everything. Constable Wilder, I see. Please continue. Mrs. Sanderson, right. While I was chopping the vegetables, I heard Kenna scream and loud crash from the other room. When I went to find out what had happened, I saw her sitting on the floor, with pieces of my grandmother's antique mirror all over the place. She had a few shards caught in her hair, and sticking out of the skin on her face and arms. There were also some minor cuts on her clothes, but jeans are pretty hardy and that black turtleneck of hers is fairly thick, so I imagine the pieces just got stuck. Anyways, the mirror looked like it had exploded somehow. Constable Wilder, any ideas on how that could have happened? Did Kenna say anything about it? Mrs. Sanderson, no, not about the mirror. All she said was that she heard something buzzing and it wasn't stopping, but I couldn't hear anything. I thought it might have been a result of some head trauma because of the mirror, so I just took her to the kitchen where I could keep an eye on her and called the ambulance. Constable Wilder, alright, what happened next? Mrs. Sanderson, she dropped the glass and started crying, clutching at her head in pain, covering her ears and screaming for it to stop. I thought I'd take the chance to get the glass away from her, but the screaming got worse and she snatched it from me. I think that's when she attacked me. Constable Wilder, you aren't sure? Mrs. Sanderson, it's mostly a blur after that point, to be honest. There was so much pain that I wasn't really taking it all in. I know she stabbed me 36 times, from what the doctor told me when I woke up. Anyways, that when. Constable Wilder, take your time Mrs. Sanderson, I'm in no hurry. Would you like another glass of water? Okay then, whenever you're ready. Mrs. Sanderson, Heath and Paul came into the kitchen to find out what was going on with Kenna. They were very fond of her. Must have been worried. Constable Wilder From the evidence we've uncovered, it seems as though the boys were contributing factors to her breakdown. Were you aware they were bullying her? Mrs. Sanderson, are you going to trust what lunatic wrote in some book over my boys who aren't here to defend themselves? Constable Wilder The evidence. Mrs. Sanderson, They were good boys. Do you want to know what happened or not? Constable Wilder: Yes ma'am. Please, continue. Mrs. Sanderson, HMPH. As I was saying, my boys came to check on their dear foster sister. I remember her screeching like a banshee when she attacked Heath, and she SSD stabbed him B between T the eyes. And T then she went A after Paul. Talking about the deaths of her children was understandably too much for the poor woman to handle. Mrs. Sanderson unfortunately never recovered from the incident, having suffered severe nerve damage and is unable to perform basic tasks without difficulty. She is currently living in an undisclosed location with a live-in caregiver and is undergoing intensive therapy sessions concerning her fear of the thin man and the fractured girl she had taken into her home. The rest of the Sanderson family was butchered. Heath Sanderson died instantly when the mirror fragment pierced his brain, and a large chunk broke off in his head. Paul was found in the living room, almost to the front door, and police believe he had been stabbed repeatedly in the back with a kitchen knife. By the blood on the floor, it seems he survived long enough to pull himself the rest of the way to the front door, but was unable to reach the knob. Finally, there was Gwen Sanderson, found upstairs in her old bedroom, halfway under her bed, as though she had been dragged out from under it. She had been cut and mutilated, with 13 pieces of the mirror jabbed all over her body, including 2 almost identical pieces lodged in the girl's eyes. Her face was frozen in sheer terror, her mouth stretched open in a silent scream as her hands clutched at her scratched cheeks, bits of skin under her nails. The autopsy revealed that she had actually died of a heart attack, and the investigators believe the mutilation had happened afterwards for the thrill of revenge. The case file for Kenna Blake was the most earth-shattering I had ever encountered as a social worker. It's an emotional job, full of turmoil and heartache, but isn't without its rewards when things go well. However, when things go wrong, it can be fatal. I will never forgive myself for what happened to that poor girl, and to the family I placed her with. Kenna Blake, that fracture of a girl, has never been found. Update: I just found out last night that Mrs. Sanderson passed away last night. She was found sitting at her vanity, head resting on her folded arms as though she were sleeping. They're saying she died of a heart attack, but that doesn't explain why the mirror on the vanity had been smashed in, or why they found traces of the glass in her eyes. The Asylum. Made by Thea D'Angel. Found in www.creepypasta.org web link. My friends and I used to do a lot of geocaching after our senior year in high school. For those who don't know what geocaching is, it's essentially a worldwide scavenger hunt. People will select sites and conceal a geocache somewhere unobtrusive, then post GPS coordinates on geocaching websites where other searchers can download the coords and locate the cache. Usually, people who have found the object, often it's a chest or something hollow, will leave a note or small personal memento for future searchers to find and appreciate. There are several types of geocaches, and most of them are thematic in nature, that is scenic destinations, romantic sites, hard-to-reach areas, etc. This story begins when my friends and I decided to try a series of purportedly haunted locales within about an hour's drive of our hometown. It began innocently enough. Most of the sites had spooky backstories that were, of course, entirely fabricated. So we had a great time scaring the piss out of each other and generally creeping ourselves out. We'd begun searching after the sun had set to enhance the creep factor, but by around midnight, most of our large group had dwindled off and gone their separate ways. When we reached our last gourd, there was just myself, Rebecca, Kevin, and Evan left, and we were determined to knock it off our list. Rebecca was our guide for the night, in charge of putting in the coordinates and reading us the backstory behind each site. So, while I drove, she began reading about the last one out loud to the rest of us. Now, I'm paraphrasing here, but it was something along the lines of: Henkel Asylum, constructed in the early 1900s, the James Henkel Asylum was built to house a burgeoning population of the criminally insane. men who had committed vile crimes, rape, murder, torture, without signs of remorse were deemed mentally unstable and sent to this facility for further study and rehabilitation. Once committed, very few criminals were ever released back into society, and those that were usually had been given frontal lobotomies, a popular experimental procedure at the time, or electroshock therapy, both of which rendered the patient nearly brain-dead, capable of performing only rudimentary tasks. Stories: contemporary visitors to the asylum report hearing banging noises, cell doors opening and closing, and hearing cackling laughter that is abruptly cut short. It was pretty standard fare compared to the rest of the sites we'd visited that night, and we naturally had a good time psyching each other out for the next 15 minutes while I drove us to the asylum. We'd all heard about it, it was in our local area after all, and we knew it had been condemned and abandoned since as long as any of us could remember, so we figured it'd be a great place to run around and be reckless teenagers without risk of getting yelled at by the cops. When we finally arrived, it looked like something straight out of one of those cheesy B movies they show on sci-fi. Chain link fence with barbed wire around the perimeter, 2 guard towers flanking the main gate, which was, of course, chained and locked shut with a big no trespassing sign hanging from it. The asylum itself was decrepit, looking like it hadn't been touched for decades, which was surprising, since we grew up in a pretty nice area, where the municipal lawmakers tried to keep everything looking spiffy for the tourists. Needless to say, we promptly ignored the sign on the front gate and hauled ourselves over, cameras and GPS in hand, and walked towards the asylum. Now, given our attitude towards the previous sites, you've probably gathered that I'm somewhat of a skeptic. I believe that there are paranormal things that can't be explained, yet, but I'm not exactly summoning demons in front of a bathroom mirror. So when we opened the main door to the asylum, conveniently unlocked, I dismissed the cold burst of wind as just stale pent-up air rushing out after being trapped inside for so long. My friend's bravado, however, quickly disappeared and they began shuffling their feet nervously at the entrance, hesitant to cross that invisible threshold. I took point, chivying them along with prodding taunts, and eventually everyone was inside. It wasn't as bad as I thought it'd be. Things were relatively clean, and the entire building looked like it had been gutted. The paint was peeling, tiles popping up here and there, and the metal trim near the baseboards of the wall was in desperate need of some rust be gone, but aside from that, the place was entirely empty. No crazy-ass chairs with leather straps, no gurneys lying haphazardly around, just an old reception desk and 2 hallways leading off to the different wings. We explored for a few minutes, freaking ourselves out whenever we heard an old pipe rattle or a rat squeak, but otherwise, it was relatively uneventful. Our fears safely suppressed by the presence of each other, we began to get more adventurous, opening doors and peeking inside. The rooms were all empty, of course. Whatever company had been contracted to clear the place out did a pretty decent job of removing any creepy decor. Bravado returning by the minute, Evan and Kevin dropped back without Rebecca or me noticing. They began running around, making noises to try and scare us. I'm not gonna lie, it worked until I realized they were gone and probably the cause of all the racket, then returned laughing and breathless to a decidedly paler Rebecca. She seemed to be a lot more put off by the whole place than the rest of us, or at least she didn't hide it as well. She quietly suggested we leave. Not to be outdone by the other guys of the group, I told her she was more than welcome to wait in the car if she wanted, but I was gonna stick around for a few more minutes. Exasperated, but defeated, she finally caved and followed us where the GPS was leading, the 2nd floor. This is where I started to feel genuinely scared. Before, I was just kinda creeped out, but there was something about that whole floor that literally gave me shivers, despite it being a warm summer night. We started opening doors like before, but we were all a lot more sober about it. I guess I wasn't the only one who was feeling weird. Finally, about midway through the hall, we opened the door to a room, and there, lying in the middle of the floor, was an honest-to-God straitjacket. I'm not bullshitting you, every other room was devoid of objects, but there it was. A fucking straitjacket, in the middle of the floor of some random-ass room in a condemned mental asylum. We all kinda looked at each other with raised eyebrows, as if to say guys? You seeing what I'm seeing? And of course, trying to be a macho man to show off for Rebecca, I piped up with the most ridiculous idea I could think of at the time. Dude, I'm gonna put it on. Years of horror flicks and creepypasta should have trained me to not put on the creepy straitjacket, in the creepy hall, in the creepy asylum. But teenage dumbfucker you won over, and once the words were out, I couldn't just wuss out. Nobody said anything, they just kinda looked at me expectantly, waiting to see if I'd follow through with my boast. Determined not to be called a pussy for the remainder of the night, I walked forward into the room and bent down to pick up the moth-ridden restraining device. As I got closer though, I noticed it wasn't moth-ridden at all, but was actually in pretty decent condition, that is, compared to the rest of the place, which as I've mentioned, was a shambles. I mean, it had a few stains here and there, but it didn't really smell and it seemed intact enough to put on. As soon as I picked it up, though, I got this overwhelming sense of dread. You know, that drop in the pit of your stomach right as you go over the lip of a roller coaster? That feeling, in the bottom of your gut that says I'm gonna die, I just know it. Yeah, well I got that. Really strong. And totally ignored it. My desire not to die was outweighed, as it often is in teenagers, by my need to look cool for my friends. So I slipped my hands in the sleeves, one at a time, until it hung loosely from my shoulders. Now, if you've ever seen a straitjacket, you know that you can't tie it up yourself. The whole point is to essentially cross your arms across your chest and tie the sleeves behind your back to prevent whoever's inside from moving their arms, presumably, to stop them from hurting themselves or others. So as I stood there in the middle of the room, I called out to Rebecca, "Hey Becca, help me tie this thing off." She looked, if you'll excuse the pun, pale as a ghost, but she managed to squeak out, I don't think this is a good idea." But again, after some prodding and encouraging, I convinced her to begin tying the sleeves behind my back. Evan and Kevin just stood in the doorway, expressions a mix of admiration and incredulity. At that point in time, I felt like a badass. For about 3 seconds. As soon as Rebecca finished up the last lace, the door to the cell slammed shut, right in Kevin and Evan's faces. I never felt a breeze, and when I asked them later, both of them fervently denied closing it themselves. Skeptic that I am, I still chalk it up to us leaving the front door open and changing air pressures and all that. But it scared the piss out of us nonetheless. Then I felt a pressure on my chest, like someone was sitting on it, or as if someone was pulling the sleeves tighter behind me, and it began to get harder to breathe. I couldn't even summon enough air to whisper, much less call out for help. My vision narrowed to tiny specks, and I swear I heard someone laughing shrilly as I neared unconsciousness. The pressure increased with a sudden tug, and my world went black. When I woke up, my vision was foggy. Or at least, I thought it was, until I realized it wasn't just foggy. It was dark. Like staring through a lens that's been collecting soot. I blinked a few times, and the darkness wavered, but didn't dissipate. Now, I've passed out and blacked out before, but whenever I woke up, it was nothing like that. Either my vision gradually cleared up, or it was blurry, but never in my life have I been able to recreate the shadowy haze I saw in the asylum that night. Then, from the murky depths, 2 small pinpoints of light appeared a few inches in front of my face, glaring a lurid dread, and a dim echo of the laughter I heard before surrounded me. As soon as they appeared, however, they were replaced by 2 brilliant shafts of incandescence, Evan and Kevin, shining flashlights down on my face. The last thing I remember hearing before I lost consciousness was Rebecca's scream and the door banging open, which probably explains why those 2 were standing over me with flashlights in hand. I gradually became aware of a dull murmur that I recognized as Rebecca asking me, "Please wake up, please wake up," as she shook me. She just kept saying it over and over again, kept sobbing and shaking me. When my vision cleared enough, I glanced over and saw that her eyes were completely red, like she'd been crying for a while. Trying to muster some shred of manliness, I found myself speaking in a surprisingly calm voice, given how I was actually feeling. I remember distinctly what I said, word for word. "Get those fucking flashlights out of my face, you douchebags." Expecting a laugh or at least some reciprocal insults, I was kinda shocked when they just looked at each other quizzically, seemingly surprised. You're okay?" Evan asked incredulously. "Yeah, why the hell wouldn't I be? Becca just tied the things too tight, I couldn't breathe, so I passed out." "How long was I out for anyway?" I inquired. Apparently, it had been long enough for them to untie the straitjacket, allowing me to rub a hand across my face. Another shared look of disbelief. "Dude," Kevin began slowly, "you've been out for like 15 minutes. We were about to call 911. We kept shaking you, Evan even tried pinching you so hard he drew blood, but you wouldn't wake up." I felt a cold chill run down my spine, and the straitjacket, hanging limply from my shoulders, suddenly began to feel a bit tighter. Hastening to pull it off, I tried not to look panicked as I threw it to a corner of the room. Rebecca just sat there, still shaking and crying a little bit, and in spite of the ordeal I'd just gone through, I had enough sense to go over and try to comfort her. We left that room without a word, jokish be damned, and walked back to the car in complete silence, broken only by the occasional sniffle from Rebecca. The sun started coming up, and as I dropped everyone off at their respective homes, we said quiet goodbyes. Rebecca was the last stop before I finally made the trip home myself. Being the gentleman that I am, I walked her to her door, but she paused at the entry and looked me in the eye. In the light of the gray dawn, I could see her eyes were still reddened from all the crying. She was very quiet, and she said, "I have to ask you something." "Yeah sure, what is it?" I said, half expecting another "you sure you're alright?" like I'd been getting the whole ride home. She surprised me by asking, "Do you know how long it took Evan and Kevin to get the door open?" Her eyes held a look that I could never forget. It was raw fear. Something happened in that fraction of time between me blacking out and them getting in there that had absolutely terrified her. And seeing that look, I realized. I was blacked out for 15 minutes. How long was she alone in that room? "No." I replied slowly, "How long?" 5 minutes. They said it took 5 minutes for them to open that stupid door. "I was in there and I saw you, and I saw," she broke off, another sob stopping her mid-sentence. At that point, I didn't want to know. I still don't want to know. I gripped her by the shoulders and said firmly, "Rebecca. It doesn't matter. No matter what you saw. I'm here, you're here, we're both safe. It doesn't matter. Nothing bad will happen. I promise." She just nodded numbly, opened her door, and walked inside her house. The next time I saw her, she was back to her usual self. But whenever I bring up that night to her, she freezes up and turns to stone, refusing to discuss it. I stand by what I said before. I don't know what happened in that room. And I don't ever want to know. But I still have nightmares about those two glowing red lights in the darkness. And sometimes, as I lapse into sleep, I hear faint echoes of shrill laughter following me down into the depths of unconsciousness. Satan's Fall. Made by Father Death 666. Found in www.creepypasta.org web link. The Devil on the Fiery Porch. He was back again that year, the same as he had been for 5 years running, keeping the majority of trick-or-treaters behind an imaginary line of uneasiness drawn at the edge of the curb with his hell-red grin and burning cauldrons. It was a scene from Faust, only this was no play. This was my neighborhood. It wasn't just kids who lingered apprehensively in the street, but parents as well. In a place where the definition of Halloween was more like cardboard skeletons and plastic jack-o'-lanterns, a guy with a penchant for fire and pitchforks could be extraordinarily scary. Really young children were hurried past the residence altogether via lawns on the opposite side of the street, hopefully distracted by candy long enough to save them from the psyche-scarring nightmares certain to result from even the smallest glimpse of him. This left only the few, the brave, to make the journey and collect one of the candy bars given out by the devil basking in the red glow of the doorway. Trick-or-treating in the 1970s wasn't the flirt with death that it can be today. At that time, in most suburban settings, people lived in the same house for years and made the effort to get to know their neighbors and their neighbors' children. It was a safe haven from the malicious world beyond, a stronghold of sterile thoughts and selective ideals. That is why it was more alarming when the occasional anti-Cleaver oddballs, like the Warren family, managed to infiltrate the peaceful utopia and upset the balance of neatly trimmed lawns and Tupperware parties. Especially when at Halloween their oldest son Wayne Warren painted himself red, donned horns, and sat on a throne between two flaming cauldrons on their sunken porch. My first encounter with him was when my father volunteered to secure one of Satan's fat candy bars on my behalf. I watched wide-eyed at the curb while my mother yacked up the other neighborhood mothers about the sick nature of the affair. Later that night, as I spread my bounty out upon the living room floor, she snatched the king-size Snickers that the devil had given and tossed it into the trash. Only later did I understand the action, although to my knowledge no one had ever reported any ill effects from his confectionery treats. The grease-paint devil quickly became a milestone of bravery for the youth of our neighborhood. As we got older, our worth was measured upon whether we had trick-or-treated his house on our own. For most of the neighborhood kids, it was a confrontation with their own childhood fears, a rite of passage. But my own eventual encounter with him reckoned with more than mere cultural demons peak. For me it was not a conquest, but a beginning, a passageway to a haunted life well beyond the October ritual. And after what it indirectly wrought upon my life and the life of my childhood friend, Dan Rutgers, I came to realize that I had more in common with Wayne Warren than anyone would ever know. I was old enough to trick-or-treat on my own. I had been for a few years, having entered the 7th grade, but had thus far chosen to skip the devil's house despite my Samhain freedom. And as the candy collector stood entwined in trepidation at the end of his lane at night, I looked on, ready to cast away silly childhood fears. In the recessed front porch of the sandstone house, the devil sat on a black throne, pitchfork in hand and grinning like a madman. On either side of him a cauldron belched hot flames, which illuminated the entire alcove with a yellow-red glow that brought a little piece of hell right there to our suburban street. Dark music, probably borrowed from the Omen soundtrack, boomed from somewhere on the porch like a theme for a black mass, while sounds of the haunted house crept out of the home's dark windows. They were open just enough to let in some of the autumn air, which was uncharacteristically cool for Texas even in late October. Every once in a while, the devil would bark out something to the effect of "Come on up kids," or just let out a string of vein-chilling laughs that echoed off of the houses and faded into the night air like a horde of goblins. As a fan of the horror film classics, somewhere inside I had begun to admire his mastery of Halloween, but the fear of something I did not fully understand still outweighed this association. The man behind the red face was something real, and that's what made him scary to me, even if some people simply wrote him off as a self-aggrandizing jerk. "Are we going up there?" Dan asked me as I stood at the curb siphoning the last bits of courage from my body. Dan was a few years older and several inches taller, but we were two boys made from the same mold. We had been best friends for 6 years now, both possessing a fever for Hot Wheels, big gyms, and superheroes. I could see his own reservation just under the green skins of his incredible Hulk face. His mother was an inferno-preaching Baptist, and though I could not understand at the time, he grappled with issues far deeper than my own regarding the fiendish display. "Yeah," I answered, although I had yet to top off my courage tank. Our mutual friend, Bob, spoke from behind his Planet of the Apes mask. "Y'all can go if you want, but I ain't." My brother says that guy's a goon and he don't wanna have to kick his butt when he finds a razor blade in my candy bar. I ain't gonna eat the candy, I replied, stating what I thought was obvious. The music boomed forth with a new strain and I looked hard at the real fire, the past prime teenager in the red makeup, and the iron gates which stood open at the porch's arc. Well, he ain't gonna kill us or anything. He's been doing this ever since I can remember and lots of kids have gone up there. I nudged my head toward two older kids who had just been up to Satan. They just went. And if they did then I'm going. Dan, you coming? Getting a yes from Dan, I put my foot onto the devil's brown lawn and began the approach. I tried to imagine what I saw across the street the other 364 days out of the year. A stony-looking house with a dark porch and some skinny druggy guy coming and going in his beat-up Camaro. Sometimes kissing or beating his girlfriend a little, but always giving me a chin-up nod as if to say I was cool. It was just Wayne Warren. Not the devil. Telling myself this made it a little better, but on Halloween this guy was just plain different. Just plain scary. And as I neared I tried the customary cool nod, but Wayne didn't nod back. Instead he grinned like a mental patient and let out a laugh that resonated in the sunken porch as if it sunk all the way down to hell. Dan, in an attempt at proper All Hallows etiquette, moved up beside me, held out his bag, and muttered trick or treat, which sounded ridiculous under the circumstances. Hey, 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 Wayne cackled and threw a chunky bar into his bag. Then he focused on me and my spirit-gummed wolfman face. Something special for you, my friend, he said, reaching down beside his seat. He pulled out something, gazed at it a moment and then threw it into the sack I held open in front of me as if it were my empty soul waiting for him to fill. I didn't get a good look at it, but I didn't care. I'd have a better look as soon as Dan and I got out of the yard. Without any more explanation, Wayne stoked one of the cauldron fires, spit, and turned his attention to a group of approaching teenagers. Dan and I hurried back to the curb where Bob waited. Let's go next door and check out whatever it was he gave me, I said. Squatting down under a street lamp, Dan and I pulled out our devil's booty. Just a regular candy bar, but maybe there's a razor blade in it? He said, ripping into the package and breaking the chunky into several pieces, finding nothing but chocolate inside. Bob removed his Cornelius mask. What did you get? I pulled out the weird item Wayne had thrown into my bag and held it up in the bath of white street light. It looks like a tooth or maybe a horn, I said, not having seen anything like it before. The thing was about 3 inches in length, jagged at one end and tapering into a curved point at the other. But instead of bone or enamel, it was made from a semi-transparent material with what looked like microscopic electronic components inside. Let me check it out, Dan said, grabbing it from me. That stuff in there looks like this computer board that my dad showed me. I took it back and looked again beyond its translucent surface. Computers are a lot bigger than this, I said authoritatively. Bob squinted at it. That's weird. I bet my brother knows what it is. Maybe we should ask him? I suggested. Bob's brother Ronnie rolled the horn thing between his fingers as he looked at it under the desk lamp. Looks like it came from the robot or something. Y'all are a bunch of goons. He tossed it back at me. Maybe it come from that alien that crashed over in Motor Valley, he added, making a spooky woo-oo-oo sound. Huh? All three of us replied. Ronnie laughed. I guess y'all were still in diapers. A few years ago, the cops and everybody went out there when something crashed in the woods between Motor Valley Road and Screaming Bridge. Supposedly, they found a blown-up flying saucer, but never found any aliens. When that idiot Wayne Warren was still going to school, I heard a rumor about how he and a friend of his were out there drinking one night and found some flying saucer parts. I think that was about the time he started dressing up like Satan on Halloween. Maybe he's given out those UFO parts instead of candy. Cheap ass. I think it's all bullshit. With that, Ronnie left Bob's room. We all looked again at the thing. Pretty cool story, man. We ought to go out there and check it out. Maybe this did come from a spaceship, I suggested. Dan nodded. I ain't never seen anything like it." "Y'all are crazy," Bob said, looking suspiciously at us both. Anything good was usually off limits. It's the trade-off for having parents that give a shit about you. I wasn't allowed in the creek, not allowed to attend spin-a-bottle parties, not allowed in the yard of the kid who talked like a sailor with a belly full of gin, not allowed to ride my bike to Dairy Queen, and basically not allowed to venture beyond the small quadrant of my neighborhood. Motor Valley was definitely off my childhood map. As a result, I spent half my youth in the creek or making bike runs out of the quadrant and the other half making up plausible excuses for why I was late. So a trip to Motor Valley with my usual accomplice, Dan, was nothing too exceptional. But the possibility of dead alien creatures was, and that's why this mission was going to happen regardless of any potential consequences. Bob, however, couldn't go. He was grounded for getting caught with a pack of his dad's cigarettes. Looking back, I can't blame him for finding a way out. Motor Valley got its name from the motocross track that was built on the west end of its expanse. Except for a few ill-repaired roads that cut through it, the valley was mostly brushy Texas woods and low-lying flat land which collected water to create the closest thing to a bog Central Texas could have. If something did crash in there, it was no wonder that collecting all the pieces was difficult. But since the time of the crash, which I later dated at September 30, 1972 by searching old newspapers, much of the water had been irrigated out to subsidize a local cattle feed farm, making it possible to get around in the area without sinking in muck. Dan and I biked down the road past the old junior high school and out across Highway 10 where a few industrial buildings and a bar called the Firehose stood like holdouts against the concept of renovation. These were the last few constructs of civilization before Motor Valley took over. As we reached the end of the industrial stretch, we right-turned onto Motor Valley Road, which sloped down a gradual incline until it eventually curved south and cut right through the center of the valley itself. Few cars ever came this way unless they were there to dump something or to take a shortcut to Highway 10, and Dan and I pedaled down the center of the curbless macadam as if we owned it. Off to the side, either in the gullies or along the occasional dirt paths that spidered away from the road, we saw discarded relics of prosperity littering the land like pock marks. Old washing machines, threadbare tires, skeletal couches, and limbless dolls, in their abandoned afterlife, serving as shelters for the dark crawling creatures which hid underneath. We stopped pedaling to coast the hill. "Did you remember the horn thing?" Dan huffed. "Yeah. You're gonna be grounded forever if your mom finds out about this." I nodded dramatically. "What did you tell your mom we were doing?" "Going to Dairy Queen and the arcade." "I hope your mom and my mom don't talk for some reason before we get back. You know how my mom is always calling to find out where I am." I told her I was just going to the arcade. She doesn't want me going over to the Dairy Queen. She heard a story on the news where this guy went into a Dairy Queen in Lubbock and whipped out his pecker and got thrown in jail. Dan laughed. "Sounds like what Jimmy's cousin did at his birthday party." "Didn't some girl kick him in the nads when he did?" "Yeah. He had to stay in bed for 2 weeks." "Excellent." We made the curve and headed onto the long stretch of Motor Valley Road. After more than a half-mile, we made it to the narrow side road which led down to Screaming Bridge. I'm sure that wasn't its original name, but that was the name it went by. One of those tragic lover-suicide stories went along with it. We had heard plenty about it, but had yet to make the trip out. I guess it took potential dead aliens to make it worthwhile. Turning left, we pedaled up the side road whose name was a mystery since it had no street sign. As we crunched along its crumbling blacktop, the trees began to grow thicker, leaning over the road to form a canopy. They cast a shadow across the road like a dark tunnel. Bony branches were beginning to emerge from the clusters of leaves, which were falling away with each cool gust of autumn wind. For a moment I thought of the forest in Oz, but such a pleasant thought quickly faded. I was positive that any beasts lurking in these thorn-ridden groves would not be singing or dancing. In fact, they were not even chirping or growling. It was oddly silent, which was even more disturbing. As we neared Screaming Bridge, The asphalt turned to sandy loam, making it difficult for our bicycles despite the fact that they were the rugged Huffy models with plastic gas tanks screwed to the crossbar to emulate motorcycles. We decided to park them out of sight and go the rest of the way on foot. The bridge was nothing, really. A dirt road that ended in a huge drop filled with sun-faded beer cans and other less identifiable trash. After taking a piss off of its edge, we headed south in the direction Rondi had told us the UFO had supposedly crashed. I checked my pocket for the lock blade knife I had bought with my allowance prior to my last hunting trip with my father. I was no stranger to the country, having been brought along on numerous deer hunts since I was old enough to walk. But in spite of my self-proclaimed exploration expertise and my determination to expose the mystery locked away in Motor Valley, my heart beat hard against my ribs. There was something about the place that seemed deceptive, maybe even evil, which I had not encountered in any of my previous rural expeditions. Crisscrossing the area, we began to look for any signs of whatever signs there might be of a flying saucer crash. But the undergrowth was thick and I soon realized that there would be little hope of finding anything without knowledge of the exact impact location. We wandered on though, scanning for burnt trees or any other peculiar markings. After about 30 minutes, Dan signaled me over to a dense clump of trees where he had spotted something. "Check this out," he said, directing my vision past the branches to a dilapidated shack standing in a clearing 25 yards away. It wasn't a UFO, but at least it was something other than trees and rocks. Dan looked openly disturbed by the possibility of who, or what, might be making it a home. "I wonder if anyone lives there? I don't see any cars," I remarked. "I thought I saw something move by that window," Dan said solemnly. I looked at the filmy window. "I don't know how you could have, look how dirty it is." "Yeah, maybe I was seeing things. I think we better get out of here. Search back over closer to the bridge." "Let's not worry about it," I retorted, trying to look at the situation logically. "If anybody does live there, they'll probably be real old and we could always outrun them." Dan nodded, but I could tell he wasn't wholeheartedly backing me on the decision. "Let's go this." I began as I heard the sound of a stick crack behind us. I spun around. Just feet from us stood a man. He looked old, but his unkempt appearance made an accurate guess at his age impossible. His hair was a brownish gray and poked out from his head like wild grass, framing a dirty unshaven face. A demented smile revealed several missing teeth from the brown rotted mess inside his mouth. He was scratching himself through a convenient hole in his ratty overalls with a handful of long, curling nails as he leered at us. We started to bolt. "Hold on youngins. You boys can't just come poking round out here without talking to old Licky." The man made a scrunching gesture with his face, which looked like the epileptic wink of a madman. We halted our retreat. I fished for something good to say. "My dad's looking for some firewood right back there," I said, pointing in no particular direction. We were just looking around. "You can't fool old Licky. I knows you're out here by yourselves. If your dad was around you wouldn't look so scared," he said, this time fully protruding his tongue and circling it around his lips in a nervous motion. "Really, sir?" Dan began. But the old man cut him off. "My feelings might get hurt if you keep lying, boy. We're sorry, but we have to get back home soon," I added as if I were quoting from the repertoire of Wally Cleaver. "Not before you come on in and have a drink with Licky. I wanna show you something." He began to walk towards us. Now to this day I can't tell you why we went into that weirdo's shack, but I guess we feared more what would happen if we didn't follow his wishes than what would happen if we did. Maybe I had more faith in my knife than I should have. Regardless, I kept my eyes on the old man as he led us into the leaning gray shanty. "You boys like Coca-Colas?" he asked as we followed him inside. Yeah," I said, knowing full well that Dan was a strict 7-Up drinker, but under the circumstances figuring it wouldn't matter. The first thing that struck us sour about the inside of the shack was the smell. Worse than the smell of Licky himself, It was like the musty smell of an old house exponentially worsened until it reached near organic putrefaction. A snail of nausea slinked across my gut as the first thick waft of stench rolled into my lungs. The cramped single room of the shanty was as rotted on the inside as it was on the outside. The exposed boards of the ceiling were completely gray and covered with cobwebs. An old rickety cot was shoved into one corner, a brownish stain covering its sagging middle. Over at the opposite end was a broken-down stove, resembling a leper with its rust-eaten porcelain finish. A tattered beige couch sat rotting against the long wall, almost hidden by countless piles of old water-stained magazines. They looked mostly like Playboys and Hustlers as far as I could tell. To our right sat a dusty old wooden crate. It looked to me like a coffin used back in the 1800s. A fat rat sniffed around its base. But the most shocking aspect of the shack was the wallpaper. Old pin-up style nudie pictures had been cut from countless magazines and stuck to every visible inch of wall. Superimposed on top of this layer were random pictures of goats and other wild beasts, taken from magazines I was not familiar with. They were all faded by the damp and rotting conditions. I had seen plenty of naked pictures in my grandfather's garage, so I wasn't too shocked. But Dan's religious background didn't seem to be mixing well with the mass of nude women and goats. "You boys wouldn't be looking for a UFO, would you?" Licky asked as he began digging in a dirty box near the stove. I peeled my eyes from a cherry-nippled blonde. "Why would you think that?" I asked. "I've caught plenty of curious peoples digging round here like moles. They think they's gonna find some kinda alien body." "Why would they think that?" I asked dumbly. "A smart boy like you sure to know about a UFO crash over here," Licky said, pulling out 2 dusty bottles from the box. "Why else you'd be out here nosing round?" "Well, we've heard about it I guess, but I didn't know about alien bodies." "These are good Coca-Colas," he said, popping the caps off the dirty Coke bottles with his teeth and handing one each to Dan and I as he made another 360 around his chops with his tongue. I discreetly knocked a dirt dauber's nest off the side of my bottle and took a drink. Actually, I let the liquid touch my lips, making it appear that I had taken a drink, not letting any of it slip into my mouth. Dan did the same. "How'd oil like old Licky's place? You boys got names?" Jim," I said, making one up. Dan delivered one too. "And Horace." Under any other circumstance, I would have busted out laughing. But the unsettling atmosphere suppressed any such reactions. "I used to have a granddaddy named Horace. Loved him to death, that old bugger. Silly as a whistle though. Cut his own arm off one night thinking it was Rattler." The old man laughed loudly and moved his arm around like it was a snake. I glanced back at the door. I felt better knowing that we stood closer to the door than Licky. I noticed Dan still staring queasily at the exotic wallpaper with a clash of curiosity and horror, as if he were looking at a car wreck. "Did you see the UFO crash?" I asked, trying to conceal my nervousness. "Well, not exactly. I come here after that." "You're looking for the UFO too?" "No, them rangers hauled that off. I's waiting for something. A horn." With that my heart went flatline. The thing in my pocket was in some way connected to the old man. I began to realize that maybe what Wayne Warren had said about finding some flying saucer parts may have been true. "You ain't happened to see a horn out there, have you?" he said, moving to the wooden crate. "Was it a real UFO from outer space?" Dan finally kicked in. "Yep. From a planet so far away that them stupid scientists ain't seen it yet." "You never answer about that horn," his twang suddenly growing menacing. Our faces began to flush. "You little clever Dickens know something, don't ya?" He ran his hand across the crate like he was caressing the skin of a lover. "What horn? Fess up, boy. If you got the horn, ya can't resist it." "I knows, 'cause I found the other one when I worked for the sheriff's office and we was out here cleaning up after the crash. I found something else too that the rest of them never saw." Fear finally slapped my common sense. I pulled the clear horn thing out of my pocket. "I got this trick or treating," I said as I threw it to the floor behind Licky and bolted for the door. Dan turned to follow, but a deep bark stopped us midway. A large dog stood growling outside. We looked back at Licky, fully expecting him to move and for the kill right then. "Colossus! Simmer down," he yelled gruffly. "He's just a tad grumpy, if you know what I mean. You don't gotta be scared of him or roll, Licky. I like you boys," he said, picking up the horn. "What do you want from us?" I demanded. "Now Yunjin, don't get all upset. You brung me this here horn that I've been looking for." "Does that have something to do with the UFO?" I asked, trying to calm down. "Where'd you get it?" "From some guy dressed up like the devil on Halloween." Hey, I knew it," he said with a lick. "I knew it'd find its way back here one way or another. Dressed like the devil. Goddamn." He seemed excited by the fact that Wayne had been dressed like Satan. I wasn't sure what the connection was between him and this old man, or if there even was one, but somehow we had been transporting something very important. "Does that belong to an alien?" Dan asked. "Some folks might call him an alien," he began, "but it really belongs to the devil. I've been keeping his body here since his spacecraft wrecked, waiting for this other horn to turn up. Sometimes it takes the dickens for things to work out. But they always do. Now I can get the rewards I deserve." "The devil?" I asked skeptically. Licky patted the wooden crate. "Yes sir, he's in here." We were speechless. "I bet you boys would like to see him, wouldn't ya?" I shook my head slowly as tears began to well in my eyes. Dan just stood frozen as if he were looking down upon Virgil's 9 rings of hell. "Well, here he is," Licky yelled as he flung open the crate's lid. Its old hinges screeched like a dying animal. Inside lay the body of a creature. It was a brownish red and shriveled like the corpse of a mummy. It had arms and legs and a human-shaped torso, but they were thin and wiry. Its pointed chin and bulbous forehead made it appear like a reddish version of the little gray aliens that people always claim to see. A set of pointed teeth were thrust forward from the retracted lips, opposing the huge sunken sockets in whose valleys rested closed eyes. I could smell the acrid odor of age filling the room, as if the beast were centuries old, having soaked up the stench of death and decay for an eternity. We were repulsed, though neither Dan nor I could take our eyes from the entombed thing. "Just like in the storybooks. Kept, he don't come from no hell, he's from up there," Licky said, pointing to the sky. "Been coming here longer and you and I can figure," he exclaimed. "Don't cha like him?" That's when I noticed the horn. The creature had one horn identical to the one I had been given. A jagged hole at the other side of his head made it apparent that he had once possessed two. "At last, I can raise him again. I'll be made a prince of the sky when he sees what old Licky's done for him," the old man said, drooling a line of spit onto the creature's chest as he began to fit the missing horn back in place. The dog outside barked and we remained trapped between two rapidly off-balancing evils. Licky laughed as the component finally clicked into place. A faint whir became audible from the coffin as he pulled back. "Look close boys, you brung back old Nick." The thing began to move, not mechanically like a robot as I would have thought, but more like an organic being that had been sleeping for a long time. It sat upright as the eyes began to open. Their dark lunacy looked like black mirrors as they focused on our white faces. Its skin became more supple and its lips rolled back down over his teeth. The thing smiled a grin that was beyond pure evil, that seemed to crawl through my eyes, down my throat, and squeeze the bloody pulp of my heart like a constrictor. But I resisted, and so did Dan. Breaking our gaze, we ran for the door as the beast jumped from the crate. I had been used somehow to bring the horn back to the creature. It seemed to explain my complete lack of good judgment when we followed Licky into the shack. I had been possessed by something much the way Wayne Warren had been, dressing up like the devil, probably unknowingly waiting for some adventurous kid to take the horn from him like the wind carries a seed to its final destination, where it could root and produce seed of its own. "Ain't you a beaut?" Licky cried. The devil responded with a snap of his clawed hand. Blood splattered the nude-papered wall as the old man chortled and fell to the ground, callously beheaded despite his surface. "Shit. I screamed as Dan and I burst through the door and tripped over the dog. We both hit the ground, along with the dog, in a whirlwind of confusion and gnashing teeth. I felt a few bites hit my arms, but when the devil crashed through the door, the dog yelped and darted into the trees. The creature smiled again and looked at us. It was one of those split seconds between reactions when the mind and body are trying to get into sync, when the true perspective of time is lost. For a few endless seconds the foul beast stood above us, and before we could pull ourselves up to run, he turned and headed into the woods. He spun his neck around to look at us one more time as he blended into the countryside and disappeared. Dan and I ran in the opposite direction, back toward our bikes. We said nothing as we careened through the branches and undergrowth, gouging at us with fingery thorns as if it were reluctant to let us leave. It wasn't until we had pedaled all the way back to Motor Valley Road that I finally broke the silence and confronted the reality of what had taken place. "Do you think it was the devil?" Dan, terror etched into his face, shook his head. "If it was an alien and there's more of them." He began to cry. I could feel my hands trembling on the handle grips. The reality of aliens and devils, or something that was both, was too much for my young mind. "We can't tell anyone," I said. "I don't ever want to talk about it again." "We won't." "Never," was the last clear word I heard before he fell into a repetitive mumble. If it was the devil, alien or otherwise, and we were responsible for bringing him to life, I grappled with the thought. The thought that has slowly wrested the life from me over the years, like a patient serpent subduing its prey. The same thought that was responsible for the phone call I just received. I gently sat the telephone receiver back into the cradle. It had been Dan's sister on the line. He was found dead in his car that morning. He had been missing for weeks. She asked me if I had any idea why he would have driven out to a remote spot in Motor Valley and put a gun to his head. I told her I didn't know.